Good evening, St. Lucia. Welcome to another edition of NewsMaker Live. If it's Wednesday, it's NewsMaker Live with Laura, where we make your stories our stories. Last week, St. Lucia, I spoke to you about qualification versus certification. And it seems that we have taken this to a ridiculous level. Imagine my astonishment as I watched a talk show last evening, and the topic is, well, it was Raise Your Voice being featured, and Miss Catherine Sealis was the guest. And in the open mic segment where you get to call in, some lady, a woman nonetheless, calls in and asks Miss Sealis what her qualification is to be at the helm of an organization advocating for women's rights. I mean, seriously. In an era when many St. Lucian women are either hoarse from speaking or tired from walking up and down to a broken justice system, where other women would voluntarily give of their time and energy and expertise, experience and networking to assist us other women, a woman would call and ask, what is your qualification? And I'm wondering whether this was just because, you know, she just got caught up in the throes of the debate of what's your qualification versus your certification. I mean, honestly, really. And then she pounces on the political affiliation of the guests. And I'm thinking to myself, well, shouldn't the issue be of women's rights? The fact that women find it so absurd to try to make use of our justice system, try to get respite from the very laws that are there to protect them from their batterers and abusers. Shouldn't that be the issue? Why are we constantly thrusting a political motivation or a political slant onto issues and then complain that it's all about politics? We really, honestly, should take a look in the mirror. What is her qualification? I dare ask the caller, what was Rosa Parks' qualification for being at the helm or at the forefront of black rights, the black right movement? I'll tell you what her qualifications were. Her qualifications were tired feet. Her qualifications was a tired soul. Her qualification was her tiredness of being pushed around by white bigots. That was her qualification. Rosa Parks only wanted a seat on a bus and to be treated equally. Those were her qualifications. She hadn't been to university. She didn't have a master's degree or a PhD in human rights and civil rights. She didn't have any of those things. And I highly doubt that Rosa Parks had ever thought of herself as a martyr or as a heroine when it came to civil rights. She was simply tired. Her soul was tired. Her feet were tired. Her entire being was tired. That was a qualification. So let us stop being absurd in our quest to jump on a bandwagon. And speaking of absurdity, I listened to Leo Clark this week, building up on a tired topic of Spider Montoot calling Emma Hippolyte granny. And it seems to me that this man has completely lost his mind. His exercise in absurdity, to coin a phrase from our PM, was so ridiculous. Had he forgotten that Menisa Rambali, a prominent member of his party, had called Sir John, arguably the father of our nation, a toothless tiger, a has-been? Has he forgotten all of those tired rhetoric that were used against Sir John? Has he forgotten that his own party had called a member now of his party, a former prime minister nonetheless, Tujusu? I mean, seriously, are we going to go down that route? Are we going to sling all that? But yes, I agree that the type of politics that we engage in this country needs to change. But my God, let it rest. It cannot start by pointing fingers. It cannot start by saying, oh, it's the opposition who always does that. No. The patent, or however you want to pronounce the word, for dirty politics stems with the St. Lucia Labour Party. I'm sorry. That it is what it is. It is what it is. These guys have the corner store on Movelang, on Pekong when it comes to politics. I mean, they have got it down pat, bar none. We have to hand it to them. So let's acknowledge that it was in poor taste and move on. Now, speaking of moving on, the type of politics that I would like to engage in, the type of politics that I would like to see either of the major political parties in St. Lucia engage in, would be one that speaks to or lends their voice to issues that regard the less fortunate, the more marginalized, the more disadvantaged of us. And I'm speaking of, in the main, children. This week, we found out that St. Lucia ranks 110 in the world by Child Rights International Network. It's a body that looks at the rights of the child internationally. And we ranked 110, I think, out of 190 or 198 countries. Why aren't we hearing the St. Lucia Labour Party speaking about that? Why aren't we hearing the United Workers' Party speaking about that? Why aren't we hearing our political hopefuls speaking about how atrocious our justice system is, that our children, seeing that the adults in their lives aren't getting the kind of restitution that they should be getting from the courts, aren't getting justice, you know, when crimes have been perpetrated on them, that they feel that they cannot go to the courts, that they have no recourse, that there is no respite for them when it comes to their rights being trampled upon. That is the kind of politics that I would like us to engage in. Why are we 110 behind countries, might I add, who have been known for the abuses of human rights? Behind countries that I know I was surprised to see them place ahead of us in St. Lucia, where we think everything nice, man. St. Lucia simply beautiful. Everything cool and curry, you know. Those are the things that we should be concerned about. Not whether somebody calls somebody a granny. We know it has been done. It will continue to be done. We have to stop the rhetoric. Now, speaking of a broken justice system, I was appalled. You know, sometimes you go through these things, you hear about these things, and you don't really pay attention to them. Even those of us who speak more vociferously, and those of us who are more outraged than others, and those of us who have a louder voice than others, we still forget sometimes, and it hits us like a ton of bricks when we hear of those anomalies. So The latest teenager to have found themselves in a fracas with the law in terms of murder was a 16-year-old girl who allegedly murdered a 57-year-old man. And she was granted bail, and her movements have been curtailed somewhat. She's got to be in by, I think, 7 p.m. and she can't get out before 6 a.m. and she has to report herself to the Marshall police station, I think it is, once a week, and she gets to go back to school. And the families of other teenagers who weren't so blessed have been speaking out, and rightly so. I think we sometimes talk so much about about females' rights, women's rights, and the rights of the girl child that we sometimes forget about our boy children who have found themselves in similar situations to our girl children, and that our girl children are treated one way as opposed to our boy children. But sometimes we have to think about the heinousness of the crime, and we have to ask ourselves the motive for the crime. I really think that we need to revisit our laws. I honestly believe that there is a case to be made for constitutional reform. And I think it was appalling the way our government just tossed it aside and just said to us, you know what, I don't believe that this is what you want. You don't even know what you want. To my mind, that is what I got from "This is not the will of the people" speaking when the commissioners presented the report and it was just tossed aside like garbage, like yesterday's garbage. This is what I think was being said to us by our government. We by no means should stand for that. But honestly, when I listen to the aggrieved relatives of those boys who are sitting behind bars because they allegedly committed murder, it really shows up a double standard that we have in our community. But again, I would like us to remember the heinousness of the crime, the people involved in the crime. I mean, when you shoot somebody in the back, that means that person had no way of even trying to defend themselves, because they're not even seeing that you're shooting them. You're shooting them in the back, and you're shooting them over something frivolous as a Game Boy. I mean, seriously. But regardless, I mean, we need to revisit, and I think our mainstream media people need to revisit that story and to remind us of the details of that story. And why is it that two 15-year-old boys, or I think a 15 and a 16-year-old boy, are awaiting justice for the murder of a 16-year-old, another 16-year-old boy, over a game console? We really have to look at that, and I would really love for us to expedite or to find out through investigation, due process, the reasons behind or the details of this young girl. Is very sad. A young girl of 16, being a minor, being in a home that obviously wasn't hers, to have killed a 57-year-old man allegedly. And it begs the question, why was she there? Where are her parents? It was a school night, I believe it was. Why was she not home on a school night? Why was she out there, to the point where she is now facing murder charges? It's really sad that these are some of the issues that we are facing in this country, and not a word from our justice minister. And I say justice minister because it only seems that this minister is concerned about persecuting the opposition and not really about justice for the citizens of this country, justice for those people who are sitting behind bars, or who have been murdered, or who have been the victims of crime. And speaking of crime and victims, on the cusp of us celebrating our 37th independence anniversaries, I asked the question, what is happening to our sons and daughters of this fair land? Today we heard of a young woman, gainfully employed, being shackled, being forced, being pretty much abducted and raped in her place of employment. Two men walked into her place of employment, shut the door, locked the door, turned on the closed sign, shackled this lady, and raped her for over half an hour. What have we become as a nation? Why aren't we hearing from our justice minister, or, as I said earlier, our justice minister? You know, he just babbles on and on and on and on and on about either the most frivolous things, or the things that he says makes absolutely no sense, as if he has placed no thought into the things that he says, you know, discriminating against young people, not having bothered to go through the motions of finding out why young people behave the way they behave, but quick to the draw to punish them and to penalize them for things perhaps are beyond their control. I'm not saying it is, I'm just saying unless we have done the necessary research, we cannot just penalize our young people, our teenagers, who are basically children. Every time a 16-year-old or someone younger commits a heinous crime, we have to ask ourselves, where have we failed these children? And we hear not a word from any of the women in politics. This has affected a young woman, and I keep repeating myself every time that when one woman has been raped, it's an entire nation of women who have been raped. An entire nation pretty much have been raped, because we all have a mother. That could be our mother, could have been our sister, could have been our aunt, could have been our child. Where is our soul? Where is our heart? Do we care? Do we care that we are continuing on where we left off from last year, where sexual abuse of women is the order of the day? I mean, how much more premeditated do you have to be to come in with implements to cut off her clothes, to shackle her, to rape her and leave no DNA because you're so convinced, you're so convinced that you're going to get away with it. You bring condoms. This is not a crime of passion. This is not a crime of opportunity. This is premeditation. And then, oh, by the way, since we're there, we're going to take the money and we're going to take the clothes. I mean, seriously. And those of us in society who know something, whether it's in this case or in the previous murders of the year, we need to come out and speak up and speak out. Because someday, these crimes may visit our homes. And we would love for someone to speak up and to speak out. Where is our soul as a nation? Where is our heart? Do we care that our women and children are being violated in the worst way ever? We only need to remember last year's case of the 97-year-old great-grandmother who was plundered and raped and ravished in her own home. And we still make stupid comments like it's the way they dress. Which the young lady was at work. She wasn't out on the streets begging a man for $1 or for assistance. She was contributing meaningfully to our society. Great-grandmothers with their granny panties on and their granny nighties on are being raped. And we don't hear anything from the justice minister or the politicians in Broad, to coin another phrase from my dear friend Rick. We're just going on and on and on. We're talking about politics. We're talking about elections as if it's around the corner. Well, elections could be called next year, constitutionally. Meanwhile, our country, our women, our population is being plundered. Earlier today, I heard of, the name slips me now, but this man from in St. Lucia, talking about how we need to change and reform our education system, and that statistics or research shows that the jobs, especially in tourism, are looking for specific skills. specific skills, and you know, our competitors like Singapore and those other countries of the world, they're leaps and bounds ahead of us, and how the education, they've placed a great emphasis on education, but not once did this gentleman ever mention what were the skills, the specialized skills that are required. I heard another set of statistics today about 66% of all students who write CXC fail. They come out with less than 2 subjects. And that 50% of all students who are eligible to write CXC do not write CXC. We have to ask ourselves why. We have a captive audience of our young people. We refuse to tap into that, to find out what is in their minds, what are they looking for, what is it, why is it that they are unable, despite use, and it spells use, universal secondary education, but for me, instead of use being useful, it's useless. We churn out more illiterates than ever. We churn out more people, more children, more young people who are hopeless, who will never be able to find jobs that will sustain them. And so when they're not sustained meaningfully, when they aren't able to take care of their basic needs, what do we think is going to happen? You know, old people have a saying that the idle hands are the devil's workshop. But we have the captive audience for that. You know, we have a captive audience to find out what's in the minds of these young people. And we do nothing about it. But we're talking about elections and how we want to have a safe election and this and that. Meanwhile, our people are dying. Literally, they're dying. Whether it is physically, whether it's emotionally, whether it's spiritually, we are dying as a nation. In particular, our young people who are supposed to be our future. And when young people who are gainfully employed cannot feel safe at work, they can't feel safe at their homes, certainly not. We just need to remember the number of rapes that happened in the home last year. So they can't be safe at home. And they can't be safe at work. Where are we going? What are we doing? Why aren't we hearing about those humanistic issues from the people that we have entrusted to care about these things? Why aren't we hearing from the Justice Minister about the safety of young women? We're not hearing anything. You know, we're not hearing anything. We're not seeing any action being taken, you know. But if we were to organize ourselves and revolt, it would be a different story. We would be singing a different tune. You know, it's just hypocrisy. It's just hypocrisy. We have such double standards in this country. It's unfathomable. It's unbelievable. It's unconscionable. Wake up, St. Lucians. Wake up now, before you find out one day that there is no St. Lucia in the very essence of who we are. You know, we want to talk about independence is around the corner, and we encourage people to dress up their homes and their business places and the schools, to fly our flags and to wear our national colors. But what about dressing up our souls? What about dressing up our essence, our very being, our patriotism? This is what we need to be dressing up. Not the physical, outward, patriotic gestures, but what's inside and what really counts and what really matters. My heart goes out to this young woman. I am afraid. I'm afraid that I can't leave work late. I can't give of extra time to my employers. I'm afraid that if I'm not accompanied or escorted to my car in the evenings, that something would happen to me. I'm afraid that I cannot be left alone at work or at my home because I just may need backup. I just may need help. And I wouldn't have it because I'm all alone. And somebody would make the mistake or, debase themselves so low as to try to debase me. I'm frightened. In case you aren't. Ministers, politicians, hopefuls, and current. If you're not afraid, I am very afraid. I'm afraid for my nieces and my nephews. I'm afraid for my sisters and my aunts, my mother. I miss my grandparents, my grandmothers very much. They're both deceased. Today I'm happy they are. Because it means that I never have to worry about an animal, and I use that term very loosely, coming into their homes and raping them in their twilight years. See you on the other side of the break.